a third explanation for the Great Resignation that I'm going to talk about, and it's a little counterintuitive, and it maybe surprises folks. It's about immigration. It's about population growth and kind of long-term factors. And so the first context here is that the working age population in America declined in terms of the growth of it in 2020, last year. And by decade, if you look at past census decades, and that's what this chart shows you, the population in the United States had its lowest overall increase in the decade from 2010 to 2020, 2010 to 2020. And demographers project that in the future, America's working age population will decline without immigration. And guess what happened the last 18 months? We had a huge decline in immigration. This is a chart from the Cato Institute, and I want to give a shout out to the great economist Julia Coronado, who used this at a recent NABE presentation. And this shows you visa processing, right, for immigrants. And if you see the stacked bars here, how much they declined in the spring of 2020 because of the COVID recession. Didn't just have an impact in terms of employer demand, it also had an impact in terms of public health measures. Immigration processing restrictions became a lot more strict in 2020, and they've only recently started to ease up. Actually, yesterday, November 8th, the U.S. borders with Canada and Mexico just reopened to those who have had a COVID vaccine. So immigration really mattered a lot for the labor market the last 18 months because some calculations put it at around 1 million workers were lost because of immigration processing restrictions under these public health measures. So what does this have to do with quitting? Well, guess what? A lot of the workers who work in agriculture or food service or tourism, they're often these J visa workers, this dark blue line here, which essentially went to zero last spring, these kind of temporary work visas. A lot of workers in those industries typically come temporarily on a legal visa, and they weren't allowed to, or they weren't processed at the previous rates in the last 18 months. And workers who instead, who were domestic workers, who were U.S. citizens who took those jobs, were probably not used to that kind of work. And so there's a kind of cultural expectations phenomenon that's happened in the last 18 months where US-based workers who took these jobs, again, to fill that gap of 1 million workers, probably weren't used to that kind of work. And I think worker expectations is a huge part of this quote unquote great resignation. And when you take a job in agriculture or food service that is demanding, that's tough, and you're not used to that, it could be a big reason why quits rates in those industries have risen. Now, a fourth and final explanation for this great resignation. So beyond just poaching to get higher wages, beyond cash balances that allow workers to be choosier, and beyond immigration that's shifted who works in tough jobs and maybe explains some of the rise of quitting. The fourth explanation is Zoom. It's Microsoft Teams. It's work from home, remote work capability. So a lot of workers, even if they worked in kind of service-oriented work, probably went through an experience like many of us did during the pandemic, where we were connecting with loved ones or we were trying to do some work remotely. And frankly, the whole work from home forced experimentation was a huge success, particularly for white-collar, higher educated workers. And what we find now is according to surveys, and this is one survey that's been happening for the last year by 3 economists. They've surveyed workers about how many days a week would they like to work from home after the pandemic ends. So this is basically a shift in worker expectations. Now that the stigma of remote work has evaporated, we find, according to these surveys, that the average worker desires to work remotely, to work from home for 2.5 days a week. And that's held pretty steady over the last year. Now, employers, however, really just on average, it depends on the type of work, manufacturing work or retail work, you can't really do that remotely, but on average, employers are starting to realize that there's been a shift towards remote work. It's a desirable benefit to offer employees, but they're a little bit more stingy, the employers are. They plan on average to have the average worker work remotely, work from home about 1 day a week. So there's been a shift here. This is the fourth explanation in terms of remote work capabilities. And that means that workers who previously had a job that was face-to-face in a service industry like leisure and hospitality, who got a taste of some work from home capabilities, or they heard about it, they realize that there's a stigma that's kind of evaporated, and now they desire that. So they're not just going to go back to a restaurant job or go back to a retail or a factory job. They're maybe going to use that cash that they've saved up to kind of send out job applications to really look for work that offers remote work as a benefit. So those are the kind of core explanations for the Great Resignation.